The widow of San Roque, they say, she walks after dusk in a black shawl soaked with rain, water never touching the ground, her scent a mix of camphor oil. And burnt leaves her eyes too wide and too dry to blink. The people of San Roque no longer whisper her name, because those who do begin to lose their teeth in their sleep. They just call her the widow, and they say she still mourns the husband no one remembers. It started with a storm, the kind that bends trees and breaks saints off their pedestals, the kind that drowns goats in ditches and turns chickens into feathers stuck in barbed wire. It came from the sea without warning, and with it came her. No one saw her arrive. But in the morning she was there, standing at the foot of the church, her hands folded, her shawl dripping, her hair long, and knotted, her feet clean despite the mud. She spoke no words, just watched as Father Ray blessed the crowd, and her mouth twitched once like she tasted the prayers and found them bitter. People asked who she was, she never answered. She took the old abandoned house near the mangroves, the one that used to belong to the midwife who disappeared during the famine. She cleaned it, quietly swept the floor, lined the windows with crushed garlic and black cloth, and lit a fire every night before the third bell. The kids called her Bruja. The men watched her from their windows. The women prayed she'd leave. But she stayed. And then things changed. Rosary beads began to shatter during Mass. Milk turned black before sunrise. Dogs howled without sound, and shadows inside mirrors began to linger after the face was gone. At first it was blamed on the storm, but when baby Nanoy began coughing up centipedes, when Tita Luz woke up with feathers growing from her gums, when Mang Erning was found in his room drowned in seawater with his slippers still dry, they remembered her. But no one confronted her until the barangay captain disappeared. He was last seen knocking on her door, holding a rolled-up paper and a crucifix. In the morning, only the crucifix remained nailed to the balit tree in front of her house, upside down. And steaming Father Ray held a service, a cleansing holy water cracked in the bottle before he could splash it, and the candles melted into the shape of hands reaching. The town tried to ignore her, but she came anyway. Every third night she walked past the houses one by one, and if she stopped outside yours, you were meant to close your eyes and cover your ears and never move no matter what you heard, because what you'd hear wasn't her, it was someone you loved, someone dead calling your name. And if you answered, your skin would begin to peel from the inside out. She didn't want to kill. She only wanted her husband, but no one knew who he was, and she couldn't remember, so she searched through memories not hers, through bloodlines forgotten, through children's dreams and women's screams and men's regrets. She pulled secrets from riverbeds, voices from the rice fields, souls from candle wax, and still she could not find him. until she came to Ileana, a young woman raised by her grandmother, the last descendant of the Albulario who once banished the Mancuculum, known as Marisol de los Santos, burned her name from every record, and trapped her grief in a jar made of bone. That grief was the widow, and she had found the bloodline. Ileana dreamed of her for weeks, a woman floating in a house that changed shape. Every night her face blank, her mouth bleeding, her voice wrong shed whisper, I am your sorrow, I am your debt, I am what your blood owes. Ileana tried to escape, but each time she left town she'd wake up. Her bed covered in mangrove mud, her feet swollen, her tongue tied into knots. She tried prayers, they soured, tried salt. It turned to sugar, tried fire, it burned cold. Until one night she followed the widow into the mangroves, where the trees grew so close the stars could not breathe, and found the old stone circle once used for judgment, long buried, now pulsing with roots and bones and dolls hanging upside down from bamboo sticks there. The widow spoke her name for the first time, Marisol, and wept, and Ileana understood the only way to end her walk was to give her what was taken. She dug her hands into the soil and pulled out the heart, not beating, not warm, but still full of tears, and gave it to her. The widow opened her mouth and swallowed it whole, and her shawl turned white, and the wind died, and the mangroves bent away from her. She looked at Ileana and said thank you, then crumbled into smoke and ash and moths. And from that night on San Roque was quiet again. But Ileana kept the mirror covered and never spoke her own name, because sometimes she still hears footsteps and a voice asking, where is my husband, where is my name? Where is the child who remembered me? The black egg of Dila Dela. There is a village in Quezon called Dila Dela, named for the tongues that once grew from the trees, or so the old folks say, where the wind changes direction at dusk and crows don't caw, but just sit on rooftops and watch. It's the kind of place where salt is never spilled without apology, and children are never named after the dead, they say. A Mancuculum once lived in the belly of that village. Her name was Mommy. Inay people said she was older than the hills and younger than the moon. Her back crooked like a river, her fingers always wet with oil, her eyes too wide for her face. She sold healing tonics, love potions, and charms made from string and teeth. But if you crossed her, or broke a promise, or forgot to say thank you, they say she would lay an egg in your shadow, a black egg. You wouldn't see it, not at first, but your skin would itch, your reflection would twitch. And in 3 days, you'd lose your voice, not just your sound, but your ability to speak your truth. Your thoughts would stutter, our name would rot, and when you coughed, you'd spit feathers. Then came the voice, not yours, but hers, speaking from your mouth, even when your lips stayed still, asking questions like, who do you love, who do you fear, who should suffer in your place? Mommy. Inay never moved from her hut. People came to her, or her whispers did, but one day a girl named Clarice dared to enter her home without permission. She was 15, proud, loud, the daughter of a pastor who preached against witches. She said she wanted proof. She said curses were just superstition. She said God was stronger. She stole a bottle from Inae's shelf. It was sealed with wax, marked with a tongue scratched into it with a thorn. She drank it. Nothing happened, not right away. But that night, the wind screamed, the water in her jug boiled, her feet bled while she slept. And when she woke, her shadow was missing, not shorter, not longer, just gone. Her eyes turned gray. She stopped eating. She began drawing eggs on the walls in coal and spit each one with something inside: a tooth, a hand, an eye, a mouth. Then she began to sing, but the voice wasn't hers. It was a woman's voice, old, dry, sweet, like honey poured over broken glass. Her mother found her crouched in the silong, biting at her own fingers, whispering, "I didn't mean to, I only wanted to know. I didn't mean to open it." They called the priest, they burned her clothes, they covered the mirrors. But nothing helped until they found the egg under the altar of the church, black-veined, pulsing, cracked inside. Was something alive, not shaped like a person, not shaped like an animal, but like an idea with teeth, and it hissed when they touched it. And the priest screamed and dropped dead before he could finish the prayer. Then Clarice vanished, no screams, no goodbye, just the sound of birds choking. And a rust-colored mist that clung to the walls. Her mother said she saw Mommy Inae in the window smiling, carrying something round and dark in her arms, like a child, like a trophy. They say Clarice is still alive, somewhere trapped inside another bottle, or inside a doll, or inside her own egg waiting to hatch again. And Mommy Inae is long gone, but her eggs remain hidden in basins, in pots, in hollow trees. And if you feel your tongue getting heavy, if your dreams taste like blood, if your hair knots by itself, while you sleep, check your shadow and pray. There's nothing under it. She who feeds on regret in sitio malapassac, where the clouds always seem lower than the trees and frogs scream louder than the wind. People walk fast after 5 o'clock, and they cover their mirrors with banana leaves. They say, if you ever see your reflection blink slower than you do, she has already found you. They don't say her name, but they leave food at their windows, boiled gabi, a pinch of sugar, 3 drops of blood, not enough to kill, just enough to pay. They call her Inde Lira, but only when they whisper long ago. She was a mother not by blood, but by grief. She lived in the forest where the light could not reach, where trees grow in circles and roots move. When you're not looking, she knew the names of spirits. She could make snakes sleep and turn spoiled rice clean again. They say she helped women who cried at night, helped them carry burdens the world never saw. And in return they brought her things. She could never have: gold earrings, dried mango, the bones of Bobbies never born. But the priest came one day not to bless, but to punish. He called her a servant of darkness, and the husbands who feared their wives' secrets believed him. They tied her to a bed of firewood and lit her on All Saints' Day. But she didn't scream, not once. Her eyes stayed open as the flames curled around her fingers, and her mouth moved slowly, as if she was still praying not to any god above, but to something far older and much closer to the roots. They thought it ended that day, until her ashes blew back into town, settled in mouths, in ears, in rice pots. And since then, every woman who's cried alone after dark, every girl who's wished her pain would be seen, they say she hears them. And sometimes she answers. Alma was 13. She cried often. Her stepfather watched her too closely. And her mother was always silent, too tired. Alma whispered her wish into the sink while washing dishes, said she wanted to never see him again. The water shimmered and turned cold, even though it was boiling just moments before. And that night her stepfather went missing. Only his clothes were found, folded neatly beside the doohat tree behind their house. Inside the pockets were coins covered in ash, and his fingernails. Alma started waking up with scratches across her back, shaped like thorns, like letters, like a map. Her eyes turned pale for 2 days, then returned. She spoke without moving her lips sometimes, and her hair began to grow too fast, too heavy, like something was pulling it down from inside. Her mother tried to take her to the parish, but the gate would not open, and the holy water boiled in the priest's hand. They brought an albulario. He took one look at Alma and wept. He said she had been heard, and now she must listen. Alma's dreams were full of mud and teeth, of crying that wasn't hers, of lullabies sung backward. She began to draw circles in her rice and talk to corners of the room. No one dared look. And then the voices started, not hers, not anyone's, just old voices, dry voices, asking, "What do you regret? What would you give? Whose name should be taken?" One morning Alma left her house barefoot, no bag, no words, just a bowl of gabi in her hands. She walked into the forest where the trees grow in circles, and was not seen again. But her voice stayed. You could hear it if you stood by the doohat tree on the 3rd night after rain, singing softly, calling someone else to come speak. Inde Lyra's story was never written, but her touch never fades, they say. She marks her chosen ones with a bruise shaped like a leaf. And if you find it under your armpit or on the bottom of your foot, you must never ask what it means, because the moment you ask, you'll begin to remember what you forgot, the wish you made, the pain you caused the night you wanted something gone. And if she answers you, she never leaves. She becomes your second shadow, the breath behind your breath, the eye inside your eye. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear her ask, "Who do we punish next?" The house that grew teeth in the farthest edge of Batangas, where the trees grow in twisted shapes, and the wind sounds like it's remembering something. There's a village called Lantian, a place not found on maps, not because it was lost, but because someone once promised it would be forgotten. The villagers speak softly, and only during the day, because when night comes they hear the house breathing again, the one with the black roof, the one that grows teeth. They say it came back after 30 years, long after the fire, long after. The woman who used to live there was buried in secret with her hands tied, and her eyes open. Her name was Luisa. She was a Mancuculanum. But she was once a healer, a midwife, a sister to the people. She helped them give birth when doctors could not. She sang to the sick and boiled leaves to break fevers. And she warned them when the moon was wrong, when the ground tasted like iron, and the air buzzed with old things. But when the crops failed for 3 seasons, when the pigs gave birth to eyeless young, when a boy was found walking backward and laughing at shadows, they looked to her. And the priest said, the devil walks through helpful hands. They took her at night, bound her in rosaries, stuffed her mouth with salt, and burned her house. But she didn't die screaming, she died smiling, and her last breath was a curse, not a loud one, a quiet one, like a prayer. I will return, and when I do you will feed me. For 30 years. The ground stayed cold, no grass, no insects, no birds. But then something grew, a post, then a window, then a door with no handle. Then the walls returned, made of black wood that sweated when touched, and a roof that bled rust-colored water. When it rained they tried to tear it down, but the axe broke, the saw melted, and one man disappeared after stepping inside. Only his teeth were found on the doorstep, arranged like they were still smiling. They boarded it up, they prayed. But it waited until the girl came. Her name was Mara, 17, orphaned, raised by her Lola, who never let her near the trees after dark. She was stubborn. Curious, she found the house on a bet. 3 boys dared her, told her there was treasure inside, told her her Lola used to live there. They were right, but wrong, because her Lola had once been Lewis's apprentice, taught how to read smoke, how to find names in bones, how to listen to what the land refused to say. And Mara remembered. She stepped into the house, and the door closed behind her. The floor was warm, the walls pulsed like skin, the mirrors showed things that didn't happen. Yet she walked through a hallway that didn't end. She heard her own name spoken from inside the ceiling, and the sound of nails tapping on glass from under the floorboards. Then came the breathing, not hers, the house, slow, heavy, wet. It called her granddaughter. It said, welcome home. It said, are you hungry? She tried to run, but the house shifted, the stairs bent into a mouth, the furniture moved when she blinked, and the air grew thick with something that smelled like burnt fingernails and milk. She passed by a room filled with dolls made of hair, another with pots full of teeth. One room held nothing but mirrors, and in each mirror she saw herself older, tired, smiling with Lewis's mouth. She collapsed near the kitchen, where the walls were covered in prayers carved backward. And on the stove was a pot still boiling, no fire inside, was soup made from names she knew, because she tasted hers, and vomited salt. Then she saw her Lola not in person, but in shadow, a shape in the smoke mouth, moving no voice, then one word break it. She remembered the story about the curse, about the promise Lewisa would return, but only if fed by blood, fed by memory, fed by fear. Mara screamed her name, Lewisa, louder, louder, until the house trembled, until the walls cracked, until the mirrors shattered, and the teeth fell from the ceiling, and the house shrieked not in sound, but in pain. It began to fold in on itself like paper melting, like wood breaking its own rules. Mara ran or was pushed. She doesn't remember, but she woke up near the tree line, covered in soot, with the smell of cloves and copper in her hair. The house was gone, no ashes, no sign, only the grass returned, only the birds sang, only the wind stopped whispering. But Mara still dreams. She sees a door made of bone. She sees Lewisa smiling, not angry, just patient. And she hears a voice, not hers, not Lewis's, but something old asking, would you open it again, just one more time?
If you enjoyed this terrifying story, let us know in the comments below. Hit that like button to help us bring more cursed tales and dark legends to life. Don't forget to share this video with your friends, but warn them first. And if you dare, subscribe to this channel, because here in Pinoy Phobia, the horror never ends. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next cursed story, spine-chilling folklore, or true paranormal encounter from the shadows of the Philippines. Remember, some stories are meant to be heard, but others are meant to be warnings. Thank you for watching, and remember, whatever happens, don't look back.